the more complicated issue, creating the terms that never again there will be a terror army in Gaza. So this requires long-term process, like de-radicalization of the society. How do you manage that? This is a long-term process, just as Britain and the US did at the end of the Second World War with the Nazis. You need to manage this process of de-radicalization, because if the society stays the same, radicalized, there will be no stop to this ongoing struggle between Palestinians and Israel.
First of all, then, Iran's Supreme Leader's intervention this morning. Hamas is alive and will remain alive. I suppose, in some ways, there is no doubt that that is true. Hamas clings to an ideology. It's difficult to eradicate that fully. What would you say, though, about the functionality of the terror group?
I think Iran's whole strategic way of thinking is building strategic depths through the building of Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis in Yemen. And Israel is eradicating systematically these terror organizations. Hamas has almost completely lost its capability to fight. We have seen the targeting of Sinwar, their leader. Following that, they couldn't even shoot one rocket. So I think that we are in a very advanced stage of dismantling Hamas as a terror army, but we need to still bring down Hamas also as a governmental entity that are still controlling most of the Palestinian society, terrorizing them, shooting their own people, using them as human shields. And it's time to liberate them from Hamas. And the IDF systematically is dealing with that, targeting areas where Hamas is trying to regroup, but their capabilities are diminishing every day that goes by. They cannot renew themselves. They have no factories. They cannot smuggle any weapons anymore. So we have to take the time, and eventually they will lose the war.
Okay. I'm intrigued. There's lots to consider there. When you talk about Hamas as a governmental entity and sort of dismantling that, how does the IDF do that?
So I think the next challenge is really about the humanitarian aid. Throughout this war, humanitarian aid was simply sent into Gaza. Hamas seizes this aid. They take it for themselves instead for the citizens, and then they sell it for overpriced money to the citizens. This way they are controlling their own society. Now the challenge is, how do you manage to bring the aid to the citizens without Hamas seizing the aid? This is the challenge that the IDF and the Israeli government need to deal with. And we saw the Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he spoke at the UN, addressing this issue. They are working on a plan how to really detach Hamas from the society. It's a working process, and I believe that in the coming weeks and months we'll see a big change talking about that.
So it's interesting that. So the idea there that it's the distribution of aid that would tip sort of public opinion, I suppose, against Hamas, and therefore the political entity would cease to have any real influence over the people of Gaza.
So I think that the people of Gaza are really starting to get fed up with Hamas. Hamas is simply using them as a tool. They're not fighting for them. They're just using them.
Isn't there a risk, Amir, sorry to interrupt, just on that exact point, I take what you mean. They may be fed up with Hamas. They may also be getting extremely fed up with the IDF bombing Gaza to destruction and killing tens of thousands of people. I just wonder if the balance actually is at risk of tipping, and so it's not so much anti-Hamas as anti-IDF.
So we have to remember that when the IDF operates, we all the time ask the people to move from areas that we have to target Hamas. We put a big designated humanitarian zone where we are not operating and the Palestinians are safe. But in Jabalia, for example, we see Hamas shooting their own people, forcing them to stay because they want to use them as human shields. They are beating them. And I think that really there is a growing understanding that Hamas is the problem. Now, nobody can accuse Israel for going to a war which was unprovoked, but after killing 1,200 Israelis, raping women, burning people alive, decapitating heads of children. We have a right to defend ourselves, and I think they understand that. So I think we'll see a moment when the Palestinian society will rise against Hamas, and this is the day when Hamas will stop being also a governmental entity.
Understood. So then, that is what would be indicative of a win for Israel. Is that what would lead to the cessation of fighting? Because, as we say, in the last 48 hours or so, there has been growing and loud international pressure for Israel to stop now. But actually, are you saying that they are not at the point of being able to declare victory?
So, there are very clear goals of war, and we need to reach them. As long as we are not reaching the goals of war, we are not going to stop. It's eradicating Hamas as a military and governmental entity. It's bringing back all our hostages, 101 hostages. They need to come back home. There will be no stop of the war without the hostages being back home. And also, and this is maybe the more complicated issue, creating the terms that never again there will be a terror army in Gaza. So this requires long-term process, like de-radicalization of the society. How do you manage that? This is a long-term process, just as Britain and the US did at the end of the Second World War with the Nazis. You need to manage this process of de-radicalization, because if the society stays the same, radicalized, there will be no stop to this ongoing struggle between Palestinians and Israel.
Is the reality here, Amir, that this is about, at this point, who blinks first? So if Hamas are saying, we won't stop until the fighting stops and there's a ceasefire, and Israel are saying, we won't stop until there's a deal to release the hostages, that actually it's somebody has to blink first?
Well, it's not going to be Israel. Israel is going to continue until Hamas is eradicated, just as we set as a goal. And by the way, we're very close to eradicating them. I think that in this case...
What does eradication mean,
there
do you
needs
think?
to be...
Yeah.
Which means they completely lose their ability to fight. It means they have no leaders. And by the way, there are very few leaders left. Most of them were targeted. Not able to function, coordinate anything, not able to govern. And I think we're moving towards reaching these goals. But,
is it realistic to think that would be a new permanent sort of status of Hamas, if you like, that they would, once Israel gets to the point of saying we have eradicated Hamas, that they would never fight again?
Well, there will be a point where Hamas simply won't exist as a terror organization in Gaza. As you said at the beginning, we cannot kill the idea. Yeah. We can kill the terrorists. And so basically, we'll reach the point where Hamas is not controlling Gaza anymore, and there will be new leadership in Gaza, probably based on the local clans that run the cities. But even after that, the question is really, how do you change the education? How do you create a society that is really driven towards peace and not towards war? And this is a long-term challenge that will take probably many years.
Yeah. It's really interesting speaking to you, Amir. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
That's Brigadier General Amir Avivi, who was in the IDF and has founded the Israel Defence and Security Forum.